And so now if we jump back over to Unity, and I actually forgot this in the last episode, but writing all the brick stuff, make sure you jump back over, let it compile. And it is worth noting that you will get 2 warnings. The first one is on points on destroy, the second is points on collision. It's going to say that they are assigned, but they're not yet used. This is correct, and it will be resolved once we uncomment those lines of code. But for the moment, as far as Visual Studio and Unity are concerned, you're not ever actually using any of these items because, well, they're commented out right here and here. Yeah, so just those 2 spots. So we will come back to these. Don't worry about them. But for now, we're going to finish up the remaining bits of the Game Manager. So again, double-clicking on the Game Manager, and we're going to go all the way to the very top, because this pass on the Game Manager is going to have our final level management that allows us to automatically jump to the next level when we win. It's also going to have the concept of winning and losing. It's also going to have the score as well as the UI update capabilities that kind of link all these final pieces together. So right up here at the top in our field section, I want to create a series of variables to act as links to the stuff that we have in the scenes. So first off, when we transition from any given level over to end, we're either winning or losing. And so we need to, as we go into that scene, we need to look for the game over text in order to present whether or not we've won or lost. Now, in order to tell the system that we've won or lost, we need to hold on to that information. And so we need a string called end text that's going to hold on to the actual phrase you win and then your score, or you lose and then your score. But for the moment, over in the end scene, if we jump out to it for just a second, it currently says win, lose placeholder. So if we load into this scene and we see that, we know this code that we're writing right now did not work. But we also want to say, well, what if it did work, but maybe something about the scoring broke? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a placeholder that if it binds the code to this UI, it'll update, but then any subsequent actual scoring updates would fail. So we wouldn't see a number or whatever. We would just see this kind of weird placeholder. So in order to do that, I want to give it just the value of placeholder. And then because it's not just the words, it's also the color, I want to create a color called end text color. And we can set that equal to, again, color has a bunch of shortcuts, so magenta. Now if I'm tracking score, I should probably have a variable. So since score in this game is whole numbers, is going to be whole numbers, we're using an int, and we're going to call it score. Pretty straightforward. Now, as we move from start into level 1, if we have, levels 2, 3, 4, that kind of stuff, every one of those levels should have its own canvas. And every one of those canvases should have their own score information in the upper left corner and their bricks information in the upper right corner. Then when we transition to the game, the final screen, the ending scene, it'll say game over, but then the text right below that will need to be updated. So we need to look for that and bind it to code as well. So in order to talk to those 3 text objects, I need 3 text objects here. So text, but notice it doesn't show up on our list. And remember, this is a week 2 project issue. If we escape out of that, mouse over text, show potential fixes, and we want the second item down using UnityEngine.ui. So line 5 appears and line 13 stops glowing with errors. And so now that it's here, now that we have text in our code, we want to talk to score text. That's going to be the variable that we use in our code to bind to score space text in our scene. The next item is also going to be a text, and it's going to talk to the bricks text. And in your UI, it would be bricks space text. And we need one final text called game over text. So now, with these three pieces of information, we can actually start establishing some more functionality. So we earlier verified that this get key down, go on to the end scene does indeed work. Now we're building the technology to make this irrelevant. So what I want to do is comment this out. But the thing is, I don't want to just comment out the if statement. Turns out that if you have the method here, just having it here, it can cost a few little extra cycles because Unity thinks, well, let's update it. Even if there's no content, let's go ahead and update it. So I'm going to comment out this entire method. So just to the left of the V in void, let's throw in a /**. And then at the end of line 50 here, at the end of update, let's go ahead and add an */*. And that will block comment that whole section, effectively turning it off. Okay. So now, down here in the scene management, we actually want to make use of some functionality that Unity has. When it loads into a new level, it can actually tell us that a level was loaded into. And we can use that as kind of our reset point for different systems. So if we jump back over here to the notes, and let's see, if you go searching, since we're talking to the scene manager, right, as we're loading scenes and that kind of stuff, maybe searching for Unity and scene, and how about loaded, right? We want to know when a scene is loaded. And right here, the second entry in my results is a link to the scripting API for the scene management namespace, the scene manager class, and this scene loaded thing here, whatever this is. And so it turns out that these are little hooks in the code that let you link up some more code. And when the engine determines something, it will call this code automatically. So if we go looking at it, taking a look at the code, you'll see there's actually a snippet example down here. And if we go looking through, you'll notice we have on enable, and we have this scene manager.sceneLoaded plus equals on scene loaded. But what's this? There are no parentheses here at the end. Well, it turns out the parentheses are the method invocation operator. And in this case, this is the signature, this is the name, the identifier of the method, but we're not invoking it. We're not telling it to call right here. We're telling this scene loaded event right here. If you scroll back up, it is it's an action, but essentially behind the scenes. Oh no, wait. Subscription to either this or those two. So it's what's referred to as a delegate. It calls back in the future when we see an update. So, or when the engine sees an update, it calls back to our code. We just have to point this thing to some code that matches this signature right here. So we do a plus equal and give it the name of the method. And right here is the name of the method. And when I said it has to match the signature that you're seeing right up here, scene and load scene mode, that's what this is. Scene, comma, load scene mode. So as long as you've got this second piece in here, then you should be good. And the second part of this, we have the plus equals here in on enable. Down here at the bottom in on disable, we have minus equal. So these two pieces, start listening, start listening, stop listening are important to making sure that we don't have too many listeners or too few listeners for when the engine calls us and tells us, hey, something just happened. So we're going to effectively take this same logic, on enable, the plus equals line, on scene loaded, and then the on disable and the minus equals line, and use that to be notified when we jump into another level. So over here in our code, let's, right here in the scene management section, let's drop down a couple of lines. And what we're looking at is basically this method. And actually, I should have pulled that from right here. So scene manager, scene management, scene manager, and then scene loaded. So that link right there, I'm using this to line up the line numbers over in the notes. So if you want to search for this kind of stuff, it's right there in the images. So this method, the on enable, is actually part of Unity. So just by adding it here, we get all this extra information for free. So private, void, on enable. And we want to tell the scene manager dot scene loaded to do plus equals, start listening, add a method called on scene loaded, and then semicolon. Remember, there's no parenthesis right here at the very end. Now, it doesn't yet exist, but instead of using the to-do fix me, I'm going to continue writing this because it'll actually be created in just a few seconds. So right after on enable, we're going to do one more. It's on disable. Again, Unity Visual Studio, give it to us for free, all this extra information. And in here, we want to stop listening. So that's scene manager dot scene loaded minus equals on scene loaded semicolon. And if you accidentally mess up the plus equals minus equals here and do just two pluses, then you'll end up, again, causing a count mismatch on the number of times this event right here, event, action, knows about this method. So things that get updated, like our UI here in just a second, that's part of this reset, won't function properly. So double check that your plus equals, minus equals, and everything will be correct. So right after on disable, we want to create that on scene loaded method. So void on scene loaded, and we said that it needs to match the signature that you saw right here. So it's expecting a scene followed by a load scene mode. So inside those parentheses, we can say scene, capital S, and then we'll just name it scene as well, lowercase s, comma, and then it needs a load scene mode. And notice the tooltips are really helping out here, IntelliSense. And this I'm just going to call mode and give that a body. Now, if we're resetting, which is what this does, it's called right as the level is loaded into, this would be a great place to reset the is playing so that we, the ball now snaps back to the paddle, we can line up our shot, and the game is effectively not playing, it's waiting for us to press the space bar. So we can do that by saying is playing equals false. Since we're loading into a new scene, we're also no longer quitting the game, so we can also tell it app is quitting equals false. And if we just loaded into a brand new scene, there's the possibility we have a brand new user interface. And so we need to bind to those items. So I'm going to make a method here that will be responsible for updating the UI. So update UI. Now, this doesn't exist, but again, because I'm about to write it, I'm not going to use the to do fix this later. It literally is coming up in just a minute or so. Now, we previously were loading into our scene using our string name here, and then our buttons called this as well. But I said it would be nice to be able to use those index values that were over in the build settings list, the ones that were on the far right. If your order was correct, those numbers in that sequence should be able to just be, you ask for what the value is currently, add 1 to it, and then you load that new value, and that automatically takes you to the next level. So right after load scene, but before quit game, let's drop down a couple of lines, and we'll have an automatic method. It's not going to return anything, and it's going to be called next scene. Doesn't take anything in, and what it's going to do is reach out to the scene manager to load a scene, but then it's also going to ask the scene manager what the current scene is. And then when it tells it, here's the current scene, we're going to extract some information from the current scene. So scene manager dot load scene, and the version we're using this time around will be this integer version. And the info we need is scene manager dot get active scene, and this is a method, and it returns a scene object. If we mouse over that, we can see right here, it returns a scene object. Well, from that scene, there's a few bits of information you can gain access to, including the build index right there at the top. And if you just add 1 to that number, it should take you to the next item in the sequence, and then semicolon at the end. Now, down here after quit game, but before this app management section, we're going to build another sequence of systems, and these will be the ending conditions. This is basically whether or not how we determine winning and losing, what the functionality will be. So again, in our screaming caps, we'll do ending conditions. Now, we said both of these methods were called from elsewhere. So if we destroy all the bricks, we win. If we hit the floor with the ball, we lose. So public, return nothing, void, and then win. And inside win, what we want to do is we're going to do the same thing for winning and losing. We're going to compile some kind of a string that basically says you win and here's the score, or you lose. And we're also going to send a color, green if you win, red if you lose. So because we'd be doing the same thing several times, it makes sense to turn this into a method. So I'm going to, in a second, create a method, but for the moment we'll use the write the code as a placeholder and let the errors kind of guide you to fix things. So here inside win, we're going to make a method called set end text and color. And what you want to send it, in this case, is you win, exclamation point, new line to drop us down to another line, and then final score, colon space, and we want to add the score that we're tracking to this string. So plus score. And we also, so use a comma, we also want to add a color to pass through. So that's going to be color dot green. Now, if you win a level, it's only natural that you move on to the next level. So make a call to our method next scene. And by the way, scenes and levels are often used interchangeably within Unity, so if there's a slip of the tongue like I did a second ago, that's usually what's going on. So this handles writing the information. And by the way, this set in text and color, those are actually going to be talking to this end text and end text color, these two variables we had at the top of the file. So now right after when, we need to deal with lose. So public void lose. Doesn't take anything in, doesn't return anything. And if we've lost, we can tell the game to not track those bricks as we close down this level. So we can do that by using the app is quitting and just set that to true. Now we can also use the set in text and color to set up the lose message. So set in text and color, and the message we want to send is you lose exclamation point, and the color we want to send is red. And if you lose, you don't go on to the next level. You should go directly to end. So we're going to do load scene and send you directly to end. Now, right after we deal with lose and before we deal with app management, we're now transitioning into the score and UI section. So again, with our screaming caps title section, we're going to say score and UI. Now we talked earlier about the method called update UI up there inside on scene loaded. So here, let's actually create that. So not going to be available to anybody, so no public, not returning anything, so void, and update UI, doesn't take anything in. And what's going to happen is we're going to scan the scene, whatever scene we happen to load into. We're going to scan it for text objects. And if we find any, then we're going to go through piece by piece and investigate their names. And if we find a match, then we can bind to our text variables up at the top of the file, our text fields at the top of the file. So in order to get all the texts, we need a text array. I'm going to call mine texts. And you set that equal to find objects, plural, of type. And what type are we looking for? Well, that's text, parentheses because it's a method, and semicolon. And now, just so you're aware, start and end actually have 4 text objects. They've got the 2 title, subtitle, or title and game over text that we created, but then the buttons also have text children. So you're going to get 4. Now, level 1, its canvas currently only has 2 texts, the score text and the bricks text. So these numbers, however many is inside this array.count, is going to vary depending on what level we go into. If there are none, this for loop won't run. If there are 4, the for loop will run 4 times, checking each one individually. So now we need to say for, and we're going to start at the very beginning, int I equals 0, semicolon. And now the next piece is the comparison. We want to check these items as long as I is, bear with me, as long as I is less than texts dot length, semicolon. And we need to update I every time we come through for another pass. Give that a body. Now, we already established the names are over there in our hierarchy. So score text is score space text. The bricks text in the upper right corner is bricks space text. And then the game over text in the final screen in the end scene is called game over space text. So those are the things we're going to be looking for as we're scanning each one of these texts' names. So if the texts sub I dot name is equal to score space text. So if text sub I dot name is equal to score text, then we found a winner for the score text variable. So let's assign that to texts sub I, the whole object. But there's always the possibility that we could be one of the other twos. So let's drop down a line and say else if texts sub I dot name is equal to bricks text. And by the way, don't do what I just accidentally did by putting a semicolon here at the end of a statement, or at the end of an if statement, because that's an empty statement. It means that nothing is going to happen after this line. So just double check, don't accidentally do that. And if we are indeed dealing with bricks text, then bricks text now has a link to texts sub I. And the third and final name that we can look for, so else if texts sub I dot name is going to be equal to game over space text. And its body, if we happen to find a match for that thing, is going to be game over text. Set that equal to texts sub I. So now that we've bound to these three different UI elements, now we can actually perform the updates. So right after that for loop, we want to call the methods that would otherwise go through and update each one of those UIs. Otherwise, as soon as we load into that level, our UI is going to be stale and unupdated until we actually do something. So now that we have our three items bound to, we need to go through and actually perform an update on each one. Because the idea here is maybe we're carrying a score over or some other information, and some of these things will only ever update when you're interacting with them. Like when you hit a brick, we get an update. Well, you don't hit a brick until you actually start playing the game. So we don't want our score, our bricks count, that kind of stuff to remain stale. We want it to be updated right there at the very beginning. So we need a couple of methods, or actually three methods, to update each one of these items when update UI gets called. So we need show score. We need another one for show brick count. And one more for show game over. Now these three methods don't yet exist, but we're going to write them right now actually. So right after update UI, going to drop down a couple of lines, and we're going to write the method that will modify and show the score. So public void modify and show score, which it's got to have some information to send to modify the actual score. So we're going to send in an integer called value. And inside the body, let's go ahead and take the score and plus equals value to it. And then since we just modified the score, now we need to show the score. So call show score. And it's also worth noting, look very carefully, the autocomplete is trying to suggest the show score part of modify and show score. This would be a potentially dangerous call because it would call itself, which would then down here call itself, which would then call itself, and itself, and itself, and it would loop until we eventually crashed. And what would happen there is we'd enter what's called a recursive loop. We are calling ourselves, and the thing about a recursive loop is you've got to be able to exit at some stage, otherwise you will run out of resources as you continue calling yourself. The computer can only call methods so far deep, and when it runs out of resources to call those methods as part of the call stack, then it basically crashes and it unwinds everything. So in this case, make doubly sure that you're calling the correct method. So in this case, I don't want modify and show score, I want show score. So I need to basically force it. In this case, since I added the parentheses, it just went ahead and auto-completed. So I want to show score and press escape to just stop it from picking itself, and then semicolon. And so now that we're not potentially calling ourselves, now we need to drop down a couple of lines and actually create show score. So void show score. Show score is not going to take anything in, but what it is going to do is ask, did we find score text right up here? And if we did, we can work with it. If we didn't, just leave. There's no reason to warn about not finding these things, because as we transition to other scenes, it might be perfectly normal for them to not exist. This is why we use those placeholder question marks and colors to indicate that, oh, right, something didn't bind correctly, something didn't update, so we go back and double check the code. So inside show score, we want to ask if the score text exists, then use it. You don't want to necessarily directly touch score text, because if it doesn't exist and you touch it, that's a null reference exception and your program crashes. So if score text, then score text dot text, set that equal to the string score colon space plus score. After show score, we need another method for showing the brick count. That's actually going to be public because it's called from elsewhere. Void show brick count. Doesn't take anything in. And what it's going to do is ask if bricks text existed, then talk to it. Bricks text dot text. We're going to assign that equal to bricks colon space plus, and now we need to ask the brick class for its count. And remember, just like with GameManager.instance, count is static inside the brick class. So we can ask the brick class directly for count right there at the top. And every brick that was created counts this up, so we get the final value right here in this one single location because of the keyword static. And so now, semicolon, And so the final piece is dealing with the game over text. But in order to get proper game over text, we actually have to set it up. So our method is void, it's not returning anything. The method is called set end text and color. And it's going to take in a string called value and a color called color. And now our two end items at the very top of the file, end text and end text color, here we're going to fill them in. So end text, set that equal to value, and end text color, set that equal to color. And now we need to actually make use of these two items as it relates to the game over text. So the very next item is going to be void show game over. And what we want to do is, just like we did here in show score and show brick count, we want to look for the text object first inside an if, and if it exists, then we talk to it. If game over text, then game over text dot text. We're going to fill that in with end text, and then game over text dot color. We're going to fill that in with end text color. And save that file. So now, looking through this file over here on the left, we don't see any red, and there shouldn't be any errors. And assuming I haven't made any typos in here, everything should be okay. But we still have those outstanding fix me's, fix this later, that kind of stuff. And so in the next video, we'll go through and repair those different items and make sure that all of our systems are up and running correctly. So with all of our files saved, let's go back to Unity. And we let it compile, just make sure everything's good. And I'm going to go back to start here. I'm going to end this video and pick up with the fix this laters in the next video. So see you in just a second.